This is Ryan Abraham, Connor Morrissette, USCFootball.com. Instant Analysis, spring practice number 2. It's been a while since I've done this. Jack's gone. We're here. We're trading Riley up over there. But I'm going to do some instant with you because Chris had to go. But yeah, we got to see spring practice number 2. Actually, not a bad viewing window. Getting to see some of the stretching. Stretching actually looks different. It's a little different format than what we've seen in years past. I think the intensity overall for practice was a little good. We get to see the linebackers up close, which is fun because you got Rob Ryan yelling at everybody. But I don't know, what did you think of the opening, the period we get to see in the beginning of practice?
It was great today. I got to see some of the secondary work, and it was interesting to see how USC lined up, where DeCarlos Nicholson and Marcellus Williams were the first-team cornerbacks, and then DJ Harvey and Braylon Conley were the second team. DJ Harvey projects as a starter, but I think as a transfer player, it's natural that he would be a number 2 right now, learning the defense. And we saw that with the safeties as well, where Christian Pierce was with the ones alongside Kamari Ramsey and Bishop Fitzgerald, who transferred in from NC State, who I think will eventually become a starter. He was behind Pierce, and maybe that's just Pierce and Marcellus Williams being ahead of those two guys. We'll see once the pads come on Saturday. A lot still needs to happen, of course, but what stood out to me, Ryan, was that some of these newer transfers who we think are going to be starters, right now they're with the 2s.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a bunch of new faces. There's new numbers. There's people have switched numbers and stuff. But you mentioned on Saturday they will have pads for the first time. Lincoln Riley talked about that. We'll get to kind of what he said, but stepping up the intensity. But that's what a couple of the players I talked to, Connor, were talking about the difference between last year's spring ball and this year. The intensity, it's a little more intense now. So I don't know if it's just the coaching staff or whatever, but it seems like, hey, they know coming into the season they have to get these guys ready because you can't have another 500-ish type of season.
It is more intense, and Riley after practice talked about how last year they brought in transfers who immediately needed to be leaders. There was a leadership void, and they just had a lot of young guys, so they bring in Easton Mascarenas-Arnold, Akili Arnold, and then they're instantly 2 of the leaders on defense. Whereas this year, you have a lot of leaders coming back with Kamari Ramsey, with Devin Tompkins. On offense, you have Mekhi Lemon, Jacoby Lane, Jaden Maiava. So I think that's why it's a little bit more intense. Everyone knows sort of the situation and understands, like, it's go time, and this is a business trip right now wherever we get to go out for practice. So I think that's a part of it, where last year, not that it wasn't intense, but some of the newer guys, like, they were immediately leaders, and now here some new guys are still being leaders, of course, too, but it's different where you have a lot of leaders returning and they understand the significance of these practices. You only get 15 in the spring, and USC is going to try to make the most of them.
They are, and one of the ways they're going to do that is they got rid of the spring game, and you actually asked Lincoln Riley about that. I actually liked I thought his answer made sense.
Me too. I liked his answer, too. He didn't say it was because of the transfer portal. He didn't say we didn't like that guys would have big games on TV in the spring, and then that would lead to them entering the portal, which I always thought was the most ridiculous excuse. That was the Matt Rule excuse in Nebraska. Oh, the spring game, a guy plays well, one of our backups, someone else will come knocking at the door and he'll leave. Riley talked about how, because it's broadcast everywhere with the Big Ten Network, he didn't want to put anything on film that they would do in a real season, so they were preparing for a game where they couldn't run any of their stuff, and it took away from practice time where they had to prepare and put in plays that they wouldn't put in games, or just really basic stuff where they might run it in a game, but they couldn't do any of their advanced stuff because they didn't want that on tape. And that made a lot of sense to me, Ryan, where you try to have every possible advantage you can. The transfer portal excuse, I think, doesn't make sense, but this one to me does. And Riley said he thinks that they can make more of their practice time without preparing for the spring game and without dedicating one of their practices to a spring game. And he thought that was the right move. He also said the spring game is for the fans, and they are going to try to have a fan event at the end of the spring to get people to come out, because that was really important. So I think if you do that and you make sure the fans are happy, everyone will be happy. Yeah,
no, I think doing an event for the fans is great, but also it wasn't just the spring game practice. It was the practice or two getting ready for that, so you sort of waste those. And you only get 15, so I think his answer made a lot of sense. You're talking about the leadership. We got to hear from Kamari Ramsey, definitely one of the leaders. It was very businesslike from him. What was interesting from what he had to say?
He talked a lot about the young guys. He said Steve Miller and James Johnson, the 2 young safeties, we're just out here playing football. Like, it's natural to have nerves, but like, they just got to remember that this is football at the end of the day, and it seems like the lights are kind of really bright for those guys right now, which is understandable. He had very big praise for Christian Pierce, talking about how Pierce has had a really good offseason and he's ready to compete. He's been impressed with Bishop Fitzgerald too, and he said the decision to return to USC, it wasn't that difficult. It was a decision that he made with his family. It didn't take a lot of time. He got a pretty good NFL draft grade, so I was one of these people who thought, maybe there would be more of a back and forth, but he seemed pretty set on returning to USC. NIL, of course, has is a big part of that. So I'm glad he's back, and USC is glad he's back. He's going to have a huge season.
Yeah, I asked him about the running backs. He was impressed with that room. We get to see some of those guys there too. One of the questions I asked everybody I talked to was about Rob Ryan, what it was like. I didn't talk to any linebackers, but every time you mention his name, people just light up just seeing him out there on the field. So the addition of him to this defense, and I loved Matt Entz last year, but it seems like he's going to bring a lot and help this defense, I think.
Well, he was the defensive coordinator of either 3 or 4 different NFL teams at one time. So, yes, he's a linebacker expert, but he can lend a hand everywhere, which makes him so valuable. So some of the defensive linemen today were talking about how, we've talked to Rob Ryan, heard all of his stories. The big theme with him, Ryan, is that the guy who you see on the camera, see at practice, that's who he is all the time. When the cameras are on, when the cameras are off, it doesn't matter. He's still that same big personality, hilarious guy. I remember on Tuesday at practice, he was throwing balls to the linebackers. They were intercepting it, and he threw one really hard, and the guy dropped it, and he said, "Oh, got him!" And everyone started laughing. He is really, really funny, and it's fun to watch his son, too, Matt Ryan, who is just on his hip, and you can tell that his son really wants to be like his father, get into coaching, and this opportunity at USC seems like a really good one for him. He's with the linebackers every day. He's learning from his dad how to be a coach as well, and that stood out to me too.
Yeah, watching him going through the drills, there's an intensity there for sure when he's coaching these guys, and he's hands-on with them, showing them. He would demonstrate where he wants hitting on the pads and everything. So it looked like, he moved around okay.
He moves around pretty well.
For a big guy, he's a big guy. He moves around all right. I didn't really get to talk to anyone on the defensive line side of things. What was going on with that group?
Devin Tompkins, I was trying to get out of him, hey, who's been impressing you? Who's having a good camp so far? It's still so early, but he said, we're all trying to come together, and it's all a team aspect right now. So he didn't really get into too much of the individual stuff, but he is huge. He has noticeably gained weight, and with Keyshawn Silver being out, I know we'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah. He's got a bad knee. He's not a full participant. Not that Devin Tompkins wasn't going to be a starter, but Keyshawn Silver came in to most likely be a starter, and Tompkins is going to have that role locked down even more now because Silver hasn't been available. And just to me, Ryan, he just looks like he was so good last year. He looks like he's ready to take that next step and be a real impact player this upcoming season. And I think he has an NFL future, Devin Tompkins. And even if the stats don't necessarily pop, he has that body. And I think he could potentially do 2 more years of school. If I'm wrong on that, I apologize. But he, to me, he's exactly what you're looking for. And a guy who comes in as a recruit who played basketball instead of football. The development's going to take some time, but once you're patient and you give him that time, then you see what happens. And, he's going to have a huge year.
Yeah, you asked Lincoln Riley about Silver too. So
yeah.
He wasn't sure what the timeline is right now.
So it sounded like they knew he had a knee problem coming in, and they said we knew he was going to have to get that knee cleaned up a little bit. So I don't know if he had a surgery. It didn't look like he had a surgery, but had just had a procedure or something done to clean up his knee a little bit. Riley said we'll probably have him, or we're hoping to have him at the end of the spring. He that to me made it didn't really sound like he was that convinced. He didn't really know the 100% plan with Silva right now because it seems like there are some unknowns with the knee. So it sounds like best case scenario, he's back at the end of the spring, but if not, it sounds like he'll be full go for fall camp. And then we heard Tuesday about Anthony Lucas. Chris and I talked about it on Instant Analysis. He's not full go right now either after getting hurt against Penn State last season, missing the rest of the year. He also has a knee injury, so those 2 guys are on the shelf. And what's so crazy, Ryan, is those 2 guys project as starters, and they're going to be impact guys. But there's so much depth on that defensive line that, not that you don't notice them, but it's okay, wow, there's Jakeem Stewart, and okay, there's Jamal Jarrett, there's Devin Tompkins, there's Cameron Fountain. It's for the first time with Lincoln Riley here at USC, potentially you can be okay if you're missing a couple of impact guys on the defensive line. That has not been the case. For
sure, and they practice the defensive line when we get to watch way on the other side of the field. They got a couple photos. It's really hard to kind of zoom in on those guys. But if you took a group picture of this, just from the spring, the defensive linemen from now versus a year ago, it would look completely different. You'd be like, there's a lot of grown men in this photo. So it seems like, just at least on paper, there's much deeper, you feel much better with the defensive line situation going into the spring and into the season.
100%. And the hope is if the defensive line controls the line of scrimmage, then you're okay if you don't have a lot of depth at linebacker and you need to get a guy up to speed. If the defensive line is dominating a game, then that can allow a linebacker to get valuable reps where they're not put under a lot of stress. And same in the secondary if they're going to rely on a Marcellus Williams this year to start. Not that those guys aren't good, but it's very valuable to have one position group on a defense be so potentially dominant. potentially really good, potentially the strength of the team, because then that can make everything else on defense easier. And we've seen the flip side of that, where one break on defense under Alex Grinch would just lead to massive confusion everywhere. The dam would break, and there would be these explosive plays. I don't anticipate that happening at all. And I mean, they really didn't last year. The defense should be better this season, and that's really exciting.
All right. Anything else in your little sheet there?
Yes,
We got some notes. We got
yeah, a couple other things. So it looks like Prophet Brown is the starting nickelback right now. And I don't even know who else is really in that competition, because when DJ Harvey and Marcellus Williams are working there more with the corners, there was talk maybe those guys would compete with Prophet Brown. The backup at the drills that we saw was Kevin Longstreet, the walk-on, the brother of Hassan Longstreet, the quarterback. So he is the backup right now, and that leads me to believe that Prophet Brown will start. At the end of practice, Jacoby Lane beat DeCarlos Nicholson and had a really nice rep as a receiver. Jaden Richardson beat true freshman Alex Graham. That stood out to me. And the last thing, Ryan, Jacoby Lane just looks phenomenal. He is fast. I mean, everything that you saw last year, it's translated, and he looked really good in warm-ups. He caught a pass that was way too far in front of him. I don't know if anyone else on the team would have been able to haul that in. He had the catch at the end, like I just talked about. He's really standing out to me, and another guy with an NFL future. So I've been really impressed with him in the limited time we've been able to watch.
I took still photos. I got a one-handed catch of him, like a over-the-shoulder kind of deal. So he definitely looks legit. So, but yeah, it's a pretty good-looking group. I wasn't out here on Tuesday because I wasn't feeling very well. So first time I kind of get to see them. Very impressive. So I think they'll be good to see the coming weeks when they put pads on and stuff for the first time. But I'm not going to do this all the time, but I'm going to fill in a little bit. This is Instant Analysis, USCfootball.com. Connor Morrissette, I'm Ryan Abraham. Make sure you check out the site for lots more.